Welcome to this keynote session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. My guest today is Jeff Greene, the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity in the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the Homeland Security Department. Jeff, first of all, welcome to the position, but thank you as well for taking the time to join us.
No, great. Thanks for the opportunity. Glad to be here.
For a lot of folks, they probably haven't seen you speak before or heard you speak before. So with these, we're going to use this as a little bit of a background. Folks get to know you a little bit. So let's discuss you a little bit, and then we'll get into those bigger issues around cybersecurity. Where did you come from previously? How did you come to this new role? Just give me a little bit of your history.
Sure. If you go way, way back, I'm a lawyer, but I haven't done that for a while now. I guess I just admitted that pretty publicly. No, so I've been in this role about 3 months. Previously, I was at the Aspen Institute working on their cybersecurity programs, but I've been bouncing around the cyber world for about 15 years. I've been in the private sector. I've been at NIST. I was on the Hill, a couple different roles, civil society, as I mentioned, and then roughly the first 18 months of this administration, I was in the White House, the National Security Council. So I landed here, I think, the first week of June, and been running full speed ever since.
A lot of different experiences. It feels to me like CISA is bringing this all together, right? The legislative side, the policy side, the technical side, the industry side. Do you feel like this is from a landing position, this is going to pull all those different experiences together?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'd like to think that the perspectives I bring from having worked with both CISA and its predecessor in the private sector, being dealt with them pretty directly in the White House during some interesting times, and ransomware and executive order, and then Ukraine. But also on the Hill, way back when I was working on legislation that would have created a version of CISA. So I think I have a good sense as to how we plug in, or I thought I should say I had a good sense. Once I plugged in, I realized how superficial my knowledge was, and how much I've learned about this agency, and particularly my division in the time I've been here has been really exciting and rewarding. But I think I hopefully bring a perspective from being able to see how our interactions play, from having been on the other end of them in so many different venues over the course of my career.
Until you walk in someone else's shoes, right? You really don't know what those shoes feel like. And I think now that you're in the CISA shoes, I think you're like, oh, okay, now I understand things a little differently. Let's talk about that learning curve a little bit. No matter, as you said, how much you think you know, there's so much to learn. Where has been some of those big curves that you've had to kind of manage, and how are you overcoming them? Walk me through your first couple months.
First couple months, first day was interesting. I broke my arm before I even got to the office my first morning, which made for great introduction to the staff, drugged up and with my arm in a sling. But my story was, number one, that humanized me, and number two, I was so eager to get to the office that I was running down my steps and I tripped. But probably the biggest adjustment for me, or the biggest learn, has been all the different things that the cybersecurity division, CSD, does, our different subdivisions, and then also how we interact and connect with the other parts of CISA. How we connect really well in some cases, how it's still an evolving effort. It has been really great to see that even in those cases where we're still evolving how to interact, whether within my division or externally, people lean in to try to get it right. I have not sensed a lot of hesitation on any of those sides. As I said, I thought I knew what we did, but I'm still getting my mind around a lot of the acronyms. There are many that I hadn't heard. What's made this as easy as possible is first having followed someone so great, Eric Goldstein, who built a really great culture of inclusivity and openness, and having a really phenomenal team here with me, from the deputy to the chief of staff to the heads of each of our subdivisions, even to their operational leads. Like, I'm interacting with people at all different levels on different issues on every day, and it's really been, I've been impressed with so many of these people. From my perspective, something I've tried to do from early in my career is be willing to ask a lot of questions and not worried about, like, am I going to look stupid if I ask a question? Because the odds are, if you don't ask the question, you're going to look dumber than if you did. So I lean into that. And I've also tried to share out with the team here that my mindset is to have a culture of why. We should be asking why. If we can't answer why we're doing something, in a decent level of detail, then maybe we should step back and think about how and why we're doing it. Understanding the answer may be totally valid, but and I want people to push me on that same thing. So if I say, look, I want to go left, even though you want to go right, people should ask me why. And that has so far gone pretty well. Last thing I'd say though is there's so much that it's going to be a while before my learning curve shallows, and I hope to get a chance to do this job for a really long time.
And then you also mentioned acronyms. I love this question. When folks come into government, there's so many acronyms to learn. Do you have a favorite new acronym?
We have something, and I'm going to even forget what it stands for, called the FIGHT, which is something I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's part of our federal network security, a federal enterprise improvement team. And actually, part of the reason I like that is because one of the things that the happiest surprise since I've been here is seeing just the dramatic improvement in federal civilian executive branch security. By no means perfect, lots to go, but we've really made dramatic improvements. So the FIGHT in the context of it, and I'm sure someone on the staff will be cringing when they hear this if I'm saying it wrong, but that's when I read it, that's what my brain sees.
I think you're right, because I remember when Eric Goldstein and Brandon Wells and folks who came before you talked about this. I remember they mentioned the word, they mentioned that initiative, and FIGHT was definitely part of it. So, all right, well, good pull on that one. You mentioned Eric Goldstein held the position for several years. We'll get into your priorities and your plans, but since you brought him up, what was the advice they gave you? Is there any good advice as you're walking into the new role, they said, hey, here's the obstacle to get over, or the pothole to avoid? Anything good you'd like to share?
First thing comes to mind is he told me this is the best job he's ever had, and I thought he was being a little not apocryphal, but salesman. This is the best job I've ever had by far, so I fully get that now. He told me to trust the team and to lean on them, but he also told me, and this is something that definitely have done, is both to lean on them for support, but to lean on them for the why questions, to keep pushing them. That for the most part, it's a team that likes being pushed and will stop and think as opposed to get defensive, and that's made it a particularly fun environment. He told me just not to be afraid to ask questions either up to my boss, the director, or down to the team, and I think he said just be yourself, and so for better or for worse, I've tried to do that.
All right. As folks will get to know you, they'll see. It sounds like it's good advice, and the why question is one of those things in federal cybersecurity that you can never ask too much of. And then, did he give you any advice on the Hill? You were on the Hill. You have some background in the White House. That's probably one of the biggest and trickiest parts of the job to manage, specifically because there's so many oversight committees that DHS has to answer to. CISA does not have to answer to, I think, 111 or something like that, but there's dozens probably that you have questions and comments and testimony. Anything you're bringing from that experience on the Hill and or the White House?
I mean, Eric's advice there was build relationships, and I've tried to do that. I have made it through 3 months without testifying. I'm happy to do it if Congress wants. We have had some engagements up there, targeted in the right places. To your last point, yeah, I think I have a decent understanding. It's now stale, but of how the Hill worked and how it works. I understand this White House fairly well, and I think if I've brought anything, it is an understanding that it's okay to push back on an ask from the Hill, from the White House, from other agencies. Not an aggressive way, to say, okay, let's get to what you want to, what is your end goal? Particularly, a lot of times a question will come in and we may think we understand whether it's the Hill or the White House wants, or we may not understand it. It is absolutely okay just to keep going back and saying, we want to get you what you want, but we're not sure we understand that. Or to say, you realize the impact of having a bunch of people spin up on this, and this is what it'll actually take to do it. Is this what you meant to happen? And actually, from my end, I've had that happen internally. I'm not used to having a large team around me, and I've had to realize that sometimes I've asked some questions out of curiosity, and people have spun up to work on it, and I've needed think about how I do that, but I take that and transfer it back to when I'm working with our partners. And if the answer is we just want it, we understand, our mission and who we report to. But the bilateral engagement is important, and I view that again with our partners, but also internally within the division, across the divisions in CISA and up to the director.
In many ways, CISA has been, I'll call it a little bit of the golden child on Capitol Hill. Folks understand the challenges of cybersecurity, and they've been giving you a lot of funding. I know it doesn't make things easier, it made things harder. So I think having that experience is going to be great for you and the team at CISA to really kind of say, well, this is what they're probably trying to get at, but let's ask those questions. Let's continue to create the relationships. I think the mistake I've seen over my career is when folks kind of give the stiff arm to the people on the Hill, and that just causes more adversary relationship than more of a friendly one. So I think folks will appreciate that your where you're coming from to understand all the different relationships and priorities that go with it.
That's definitely true, and that triggered, one of the thoughts I had about the team. One of the things that impressed me really early on was we were doing, and it ties into the idea of, funding and thinking about our future. No one on the team takes for granted future funding. And one of the hard questions I've heard a variety of other leadership folks within CSD ask is, what programs have we killed? Or are we looking hard at what to shut down? And because, to me, the sign of a mature organization, or one of the signs, is the willingness to end something that either has reached its value point or isn't working out well. And I was coming in thinking, well, do I have to ask that? But I didn't need to, because they were doing that, and I was thrilled to see that.
It's almost like you're reading my mind, because when we talk about priorities and goals and what your focus areas, one of the big ones I know has been around the Einstein program and the National Cyber Protection System. Why don't we start there, talking about a program that maybe have mostly reached the end of life? What's the latest with the NCPS or Einstein? Where are you guys? What's your current thinking?
I'm going to have to phone a friend on that one. That's in the to-do bucket of where I haven't dug in as deeply yet. I know we're focused. I focus more broadly on where have we evolved our federal network security. I worked on the EO in the White House, so that was a particular interest. That is an enormous topic of conversation to figure out how we transition that, and we make sure what we're doing now still addresses the threat as it's evolving. Fortunately, need to dig deeper a little on that for you.
That's fine. I mean, it's only since June. There's so many good programs going on, so many things you got to get your finger on. So let's talk about your priorities, your focus areas. Where are you heading? What should we expect from your office over the next, again, 6 or 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, at the CISA level, we have a strategic plan, cybersecurity strategic plan, and we're, these are very high level immediate threats, hardening the terrain, driving security at scale. But when you drill down on that, so I'll break it into a couple pieces. My priority is, I came into an organization that I think was running fairly well. I'm acutely aware of the cost of the transition cost, the frictional cost of making big changes. So because I thought that we were hitting on a lot of cylinders, definitely not all, I was willing to take the time to figure out where I thought we really needed to make some adjustments, and also then step back and see, okay, is the proverbial juice going to be worth the squeeze? And in the event I'm still in this role after January, we're starting to think about how we might want to look at tweaking an organization that has grown dramatically over the past 2 years. But that said, one of the things I came in asking was, what is something that we can change now where we think we'd have a significant impact that will have the maximum benefit as we look towards October, November, December, and not burn things. So, I mean, from one of the things I focused on is our partnerships, JCDC in particular. I think JCDC has really excelled engaging in exigent circumstances. I was in the White House when Log4j broke. JCDC was really new. I started getting texts from friends in private sector wanting to talk about it, and I kind of rolled my eyes. I'm like, oh, Ukraine is happening, ransomware is happening. I don't need enough. And instead, it was an almost like, wow, this is really working. We're sharing information. It's created a platform. So that, I think, is working well. Where I've heard some confusion, and frankly, internally, folks agree we need to focus on, is really defining what it means to be a long-term partner. and figuring out what different types of partners we have with JCDC. So I've talked with the team here. They were already thinking that, which was really, it made me feel good, pretty good going in. Another focus of mine is Volt Typhoon. I worry about Volt Typhoon coming to be seen as a flavor of the month kind of problem. This is a generational long-term problem, whether it's called Volt or something else. Both the adversary and the techniques and the type of vulnerabilities that they're taking advantage of, and we need to make sure that that is a steady state long-term effort. So I'm trying to think about it with the team, how we both address that from a technical standpoint, countering their adversary, fixing the problems, but also from a public standpoint to make sure individual citizens understand it and think about what they can do, but also companies do. And that rolls a little bit into the last piece, which is, I came in here as a true believer in secure by design. I don't know why we accept a world where human frailty can lead to the compromise of massive networks or critical infrastructure or the theft of your wallet. We need to not blame the victim for clicking on a wrong link, because I doubt anyone listening to this has ever, or can say that they've never clicked on a wrong one. It should not be that when you click on that link, it leads to the type of compromise. And that's because we've come to accept problems in the fundamental infrastructure. It didn't happen intentionally. It didn't happen quickly. It's a long-term fix, but institutionalizing that thinking is another priority of mine.
All three big priorities. Let's start with JCDC and the partnership side of it. I think one of the big changes I've seen over the last 10 to 15 years when it came to CISA was that willingness to share information two ways. For a lot of years, CISA or DHS more specifically was criticized as only being a taker, never a giver. Do you feel like that's part of what the type of partner? Certain partners will be givers, certain partners will only be takers, and how to understand who are the best givers and who are the best takers. Is that part of this discussion?
Absolutely. I mean, it is understanding or creating clear expectations for both the external partner of what they're getting by becoming a partner, and on our side, understanding what we may or may not be getting from that entity, and then understanding that some are going to sign up, perhaps because it's value to them and they might not engage fully, and that is all okay. But there's going to come a time when we're going to need to engage with some partners a little more heavily, depending upon specific incidents. Now or later, I'd love to drill down on the information sharing piece, because from the day I started doing cyber till today, it is still a huge talking point. And I think we are in a fundamentally different place than we were even just a few years ago. And I hope that is being understood and internalized on the outside. I thought that, I knew that to some degree. I thought I knew it when I was in the White House, but you're not really operational there. Now I really know what we're doing and how much we're sharing. And it's a good story. And I think it'd be good for the private sector to really understand where we are.
Well, you bring up the fact that it's a good news story. We always love to tell the good news story. So let's talk a little bit about it. Information sharing, what's different? What are you seeing that's different today from an operational side than maybe you thought or was, again, 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago?
I mean, I'll give a pretty specific example of when I was in the private sector. We were brought in to hear at the highly classified level about a particular new and emerging threat that was quite worrisome. And at the end of the meeting, the agency's like, okay, great. And all the private sector folks looked at each other like, this is really useful information, and it is completely not actionable because we can't go out. So we sat in that room and had a conversation with our government partners. What are the 4 or 5 things that I can go say on a telephone? What can we call our hunt teams and tell them to do? We came up with something. It actually was very useful. Where I worked, the hunt teams really dug in on it. But that was ad hoc. That is now institutionalized. That we are in a fundamentally different place in the government. And just take Volt Typhoon, look at the information that CISA, FBI, sector risk management agencies have pushed out. Incredible level of detail about the actor, their TTPs, their targets, mitigations, things that would have stayed at a really high classification level in the past. And we are processing those and pushing them out incredibly quickly. Same thing with ransomware. Our ability to give pre-ransomware warnings to, I think it was something like 800 entities in the first quarter of this year. Or, we look at what vulnerabilities criminal actors are likely to take care of, and through public resources, we see entities that essentially have that door or window unlocked, and we can go out and say, hey, you know, you need to take care of this. So we're pushing out as much as we can. There is, when I was in the private sector, there was definitely a thought that the government is sitting on a trove of information that they just can't declassify and push out. When it comes to something actionable to protect an organization, to protect data, to stop ransomware, you know, we're not. The days of if only, you know, if only the government had shared, if they ever existed, are gone now. And I don't say that to be pushing hard at the private sector, but I say that to say, like, we all are our own best defenders now, and we need to own OWN, our defenses, and count on us, come to us. The last thing I'd say is our ability to correlate and aggregate information, to understand that X is going on, and then go to Y and Z and say, hey, you should think about this too, is much more sophisticated than it was, both internally, how we protect federal agencies, and how we are able to get information voluntarily provided by partners, and then with permission, use it to protect others.
Do you get a sense this change was because so much of the information that the private sector has, and CISA was not the end-all be-all, ODNI, the DoD, they realized that so much of the, whether it's critical infrastructure or just more broadly infrastructure, like the telecom companies, the folks who actually are running the ISPs, they're seeing this much before even you are. Is that the big change, that realization, or was there something else that happened? As your example is a good one. Hey, we could do this. Now let's make it easier and do it more. Like what was that moment, or if you can't point to a specific moment, why do you think that change of culture happened?
I think what you described is precisely right for a big part of it. You know, classified indicator sharing, government certainly tried that. There was some success, but the bulk of the information out there is held by the private sector, and we are able to engage with them. So, you know, I wasn't sitting here as the shift happened, but I do think that was a big part of it, to know that this is out there in the private sector. The Volt Typhoon, I think, is maybe in a little different place, because that's some real interesting work. But to be able to get that to the point where the government shared it out in the depth they had, I think is a realization of the flip of, let me back up, the flip of what you said about the private sector has the data is, and the private sector has to take the measures to provide the security that we talk about. We don't have the authority to mandate it in most cases. And for a lot of entities, even if the government could mandate it, that doesn't make it possible, because there's resource or other limitations. So leaning into that voluntary side with a healthy dose of government authority when we need it is an important balance. So I hope it has sunk in for my private sector partners that, you know, we really are doing everything we can to get information out to you. I think it's been a slow evolution. I think some of the Intel community, you know, really helped drive that. You know, Rob Joyce has spoken about this a lot. Credit to him for being a big driver in getting to this point where we're just pushing out actionable information pretty quickly.
Are you seeing also the information coming back to you? Are agencies and through CISA and through whether it's the CDM dashboard or other mechanisms, are you seeing, hey, we just got an alert from company X about this vulnerability Y. Now we can share that and or patch that and or close it down much more quickly because it's a two-way sharing?
Short answer is yes. And one of the great ways that this is happening is through the CAV, the Known Exploited Vulnerability Database. I think it was late 2021 we stood this up. It is probably the best resource out there to know what vulnerabilities the bad guys are using. You know, within the government, we have a binding operational directive for the agencies that we cover, federal, civilian, executive branch, saying when something goes into the CAV, you need to take care of it. But then when you tie that in with the type of visibility that we have across the federal system, because of a lot of the post executive order implementations, allow us to see where this CAV could be a problem, but they also allow individual agencies to see that. So they're seeing what we're seeing. I don't have the exact number. It was above 90% of CAVs are patched, known exploitable vulnerabilities in the timeline that we need them to be. And that alone is creating a huge improvement. I know that I've heard from many private sector entities that they track the CAV and get on them. I know some of the cyber insurance providers do, but that is a place where the information may come in. We encourage companies, organizations to submit vulnerabilities. If it goes into the CAV, it comes right back out in a usable format.
And one of the things that I think also has changed is that trust in CISA, both agency to CISA, but also private sector to CISA. That means, hey, if I put a CAV in there, you're not going to be like, company XYZ has a vulnerability. Everyone look at them, haha, right? Like there's that took a long time to build up that trust and that concern that like, well, you're going to call me out. It's going to hurt my stock price. You're going to hurt my customers. I don't want to share with you because I don't trust that you won't embarrass me.
I mean, to me, it's just the opposite. When an organization has detected its own vulnerability, whether it's being exploited or not, and has uploaded that, they are doing the right thing. And if they should be called out, it should be as a model of how they're doing the right thing. I have confidence that an organization that's capable of detecting its own vulnerabilities is probably coding a lot less of them into their newer products. So they are both fixing the problems that have been in there, and I have confidence that they're doing things right going forward. And I think that's how we should think about entities that are self-reporting, that are putting these, whether it's a CAV or a CVE, and like we should be applauding them for both doing the right thing for the community and doing the right thing for their own products and for their own bottom line ultimately going forward. I hope that message is out there, and I hope we have some trust. But your underlying point, the trust level between CISA and the private sector is definitely higher. Like, again, nothing's perfect. We have a lot of work to do. But when I was on the outside the past few years, no one knew I was coming here, including me. And the type of criticism you'd hear about CISA and before that NPPD, I didn't even realize how much it had dried up till like I thought, wait, I haven't heard that for a long time. The complaints were different, like how do we do this better, et cetera. So I do think we've built that, and hopefully we can lean into that reservoir of trust.
That's definitely a great way to say it. The complaints that we heard for years have definitely dried up. I'm sure there are new complaints. As you said, there's always work to be done, but the old complaints, I think we don't hear as much. You did mention the effort by agencies really to patch those known exploited vulnerabilities in the timeline you requested. Let's talk more broadly about some of the federal civilian cyber areas you're focused on. In your three focus areas, you mentioned Volt Typhoon and kind of the reverberations of that. And then you also mentioned Secure by Design. What are how do those kind of fit into some of the work that CISA and your office is doing with the federal civilian agencies?
So, the Secure by Design piece sort of underpins kind of everything we're doing. I mean, in terms of working with the federal civilian agencies, deployment of endpoint detection and response, pretty broad after the executive order, pushing it forward. Our ability now to see across the FCEB, Federal Civilian Executive Branch, through our dashboard, the way our partners get that so they can use the information or we can. What I've talked to the team about, what I've heard back is making sure we're approaching an agency where it is as opposed to where we want it to be, and then to try to work together to get there. We have the ability to issue these binding operational directives. It's not something we take lightly, and it's a better place when we're working jointly on stuff. But, when you think about what we can do today and how we can assist agencies in a way the past, I think right now, we can see something like 5 million devices on our dashboard across 94 agencies. That allows us to see security posture, hardware, software, inventory. We are getting logs from over 600,000 devices that have EDR deployed, and that allows us to both see the things that the endpoint detection and response EDR is picking up. But even more recently, one of my favorite recent stories was based on data we were getting back from EDR, we were able to pull on threads and see some activity that even very sophisticated EDR had missed. And that is super important from my perspective, because that's where we expect the adversary to go. They know what EDR can do, and they're working to circumvent it. So we talk and think about what is the next layer of defense we have, and to see that working was rewarding. Now, you can't sit back on your laurels because the adversary is gonna react and adapt. But pushing that out, like the partnership, when you think about the Storm 0558 CSRB report, you look at the partnership between CISA and State Department, two agencies that, if we're going to be honest, have taken a lot of criticism over the years for cybersecurity and other things, but those two agencies working together to detect a sophisticated intrusion that the best private sector actors and some of the best government actors hadn't picked up is a sign of what that partnership can bring. And I think that also builds the intra-government trust.
All right, Jeff, you've piqued my interest. You know, I'm going to ask you more questions. So I know there's some sensitivities built in, so I'll get ahead of your answer maybe a little bit. But you told that great story about having that EDR and look at the data and understanding, pulling some threads and seeing activity that maybe even some of the sophisticated EDR couldn't or didn't pick up. Is there anything more you can offer on that? Or are we getting into an area that gets a little too sensitive?
Right now, getting somewhere we can't go into. What I can assure you is if that's something that ultimately we think is useful for our private sector partners, that will come out. You may not know how or why it came out, but it'll come out, may already have come out. So, you know, usually when we're pushing information out, there's a good reason why.
I figured you may say that. That's why I gave you the easy out, but
You did. I
I'm sure
appreciate it.
it's a fascinating story. I'm sure that if I told you we're among friends, you can tell me that may not have worked as well. I want to jump forward in the time we have left together. There are things that agencies still need to do to really strengthen. You mentioned some really great data that we're seeing. And I heard from Matt House, the CDM program manager, recently about looking at cloud services and how to kind of apply the CDM technology to cloud services and mobile devices. What are some advice that you are, you know, when you talk to agencies and you talk to CISOs and deputy secretaries, what are you talking with them about? Are some of those kind of topical areas that continue to come up, you know, outside of training is important and don't click on links and kind of some of those, the usual things?
It is a variation on an old theme. There's one key thing, which is logging. The reason we can detect the type of things I talked about is because we have that log data. So making sure that they are getting that log data, and if they're not analyzing it, that they're giving us the opportunity to do it. You know, deployment of EDR, deployment of our PAC capability is really important for us to be able to go to that next level. And we hope we can get, you know, continue the trend of getting agencies on board there. One of the things, again, I mentioned the Volt Typhoon before. I'm sorry, Storm 0558. The reason that State Department detected activity is because they were using they had access to pretty detailed logs and they were using them. So it is making sure that you're using the tools that you have paid for and that you have installed. And if not, you know, again, with the federated, the enterprise-wide approach that we've taken now, let us do a lot of that for you. Trust us to come to you. At the very top level, it is, you know, I hope you view us as a partner. Do you view us as a partner? Come tell me when you don't, because people fill the void of in their brain, and if you don't clear the air and talk about it, people can start spinning out, and you can get a lot of animosity or just slow things down. Also, look at the services that we offer. CISA has a decent number of pretty high quality services we're offering out right now. Make sure you're taking advantage of them, and you know, ask your teams if they need anything else from us. You know, we're from the government and we're here to help you is something we actually take pretty seriously.
I'm sure as part of the learning curve that we talked about on the front end, you've met with different parts of the government, different leaders. Is there anything that you're hearing that you were willing to talk about that you're hearing from maybe agency CIOs/CISOs? Is there saying to you at CISA, hey, here's the next thing, or here's the thing we need more from you or less from you? Anything that stands out?
Not off the top of my head. The biggest thing that I've encountered is some of the knowledge of what we do and what we can offer isn't always at that top level. At the operational level, our people are connected generally really well. Sometimes it's a level of complexity or deep in the weeds that the leaders may not know it. So sometimes something will, you know, we'll be doing something and it'll sound, wait a minute, how did that happen? And it's actually, you know, when we're talking about some of the EDR or the way, like, we'll have information that we can share back out. there's a making sure we're on a common baseline piece of it.
And I think a lot of times when it comes to all the different services CISA has, the shared services you all provide, the different capabilities, the hardest thing is getting it to the right person to make the right decision so they don't duplicate it or try to do themselves. And you know, to all of your folks' credit, you've always been very good about getting out there and talking to the community. So hopefully, I know Eric was always good about it, and you seem to hopefully be following that path. The other piece of this is industry. We've got to talk about industry. We know, I know a lot of folks in industry are going to be watching this. What's the message to them? Have you met with industry folks? Are you trying to kind of give them some idea of what I mean, beyond the priorities we've talked about, what do you need from them, or what can you be more a different type of partner with them?
Yeah, I mean, I've had a fair number of small group meetings, also gone out and given some talks. I've been, you know, with some of the sector coordinating councils. You know, my message generally has been like, speak the hard truth to us, and we're going to speak the hard truth back to you. And that's what a good partnership is. And hopefully we've built that base layer of trust you talked about before, where we can have both positive and tougher conversations. We really view partnership as essential to what we do. CISA is not a regulatory agency, and we need partners who will work with us, whether to help us understand a threat, to share information, or to take what we're giving and pushing it back out. The other thing I've said, I touched on with respect to the JCDC, is all partnerships, not only are all partnerships not created equal, almost every partnership will be different. And so we're going to need to take some time to figure out how best to engage with you and your people, and how you want to work with us. I've talked about the resources we have to offer. Feel free to come at us with how we can make them better, or how they might want to work with you.
The one thing about industry, of course, is you have two big initiatives going on: cyber incident reporting, as well as you have some software attestation, SBOM. Have they brought those concerns to you, or concerns maybe too strong of a word? Have they given you their comments about these two things? I know that is causing, I would say, a little bit of consternation. What's it mean? How's it going to work? How are we going to meet the requirements? Have you heard back from industry on those two areas, or others?
There is praise and punishment in both of those areas. I hope that, look, and CIRCE is in the middle of a rulemaking, so I can't talk about it. But if you talk generally about any program like that, or software attestation, there is probably no way that a government entity could do it that is going to make people happy. There are always going to be concerns. I kind of bring in my NIST mindset of, I want people at least to believe and understand that their concerns were considered, adjudicated, and we lean towards, you know, adjusting if we can, and if we didn't, it was for a good reason. So at least people feel included. We want to give them the opportunity to bring those concerns to us, to make sure they feel heard. The way to push people out is not even give them a chance, or even worse, let them come in, do their work, and then feel like, well, we did all this work to give you feedback and you didn't even consider it. And, you know, I've had tough conversations like that where I've said, may not feel like it, but I promise you we did consider these things. And, as I said, I brought that sort of NIST, adjudicate everything mindset here with me, but I didn't need to, because when I saw what we were doing, it was, and it's a lot of work, because you get some weird comments, but you still have to go through and think about them, and understand why you're pushing them to whichever box you are.
All right. Well, I appreciate you able to at least touch upon these two things, even though they're in the rulemaking process. I know folks are definitely interested in it, just like our friends at DoD, that there's a lot of focus on the cybersecurity maturity model certification, which I know you all are probably at least keeping a side eye on.
I just
in the last
pop the popcorn and watch that one.
You're probably better off on that one for the short term, and then see how it goes in the long term. Jeff, in the minute or so we have left together, and I really appreciate your time. It's been great to get to know you a little bit. What's the message you want to leave with both industry and government, beyond what we've talked about already? What do you want to hope that they know about who you are and how you plan to work with them, and really kind of continue to evolve CISA into where it's going to be in the next 1, 3, 5, 7 years?
It all comes back to partnerships, because it's how we roll. And again, my view of a good partnership is ones where we're having those hard conversations, and and that culture of why I talked about. I have no problem with a private sector partner coming at me and saying, "Why are you doing this?" As long as they're willing to hear the answer, and they may not like it, but at least know that we've given it some thought. The last thing that I would say, I would make a plea for some feedback on. I didn't hit on this earlier when we talked about my goals. I look across our publications, and I want to make sure that we have a good strategy for when we're reaching out, why we're reaching out, but also that they're fit for audience. Because I've seen some of the stuff we've put out, which we need to make sure we're targeting executives. Some things will help executive make decisions. Doesn't need to go into a level of depth. So if folks have thoughts on how we can do that better, but also understand that we are looking hard internally as to whether our messaging is both leading to results and is targeted at the right people. But the core thing is that, we view our partnerships as essential to what we do. We know we cannot have success without the private sector on our side, and hopefully not reverting back to the complaints of old.
All right, Jeff, I've really much appreciated our time today. I've learned a lot, and it's great to get to know you. We'll have a lot more to talk about going forward. But unfortunately, we are out of time today for this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. So let me thank my guest. Jeff Greene is the Executive Assistant Director for Cybersecurity in the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency in the Homeland Security Department. Jeff, thanks so much for taking the time.
Great, thank you.
I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more from the Cyber Leaders Exchange.